Good afternoon, everyone. So, I'm Steve Ronuken. If you voted for me, thank you. I'm on the CSM again. I run Fuzzwork Enterprises, and many people end up using my stuff. While I don't actually use much of Excel, because spreadsheets are bad, I know a lot of people do, and a lot of people want to use CREST with it, and I know how much of a pain in the ass it is to get Excel working with JSON. So a while ago, I came up with one solution, which kind of works, but requires you to write VBA. So I've come up with something, well, I've found something else and worked up a way of doing things, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So, CREST, well, Excel, CREST, and JSON. CREST serves JSON data, as anyone that's worked with it knows. And as I said, VBA is really bad with it. It can't handle it natively, so you have to use a library with it. And that is mildly painful to get working, and it's difficult to share some code around. So, as I said, yep. So, what's the solution to that? The solution is xlwings. Python is a very commonly used language, and it's a fairly good language to learn. There's a lot of material out there, and it has some real benefits because you end up using white space for just indenting stuff, which is meaningful, which means you end up with really readable code. So, with xlwings, you can just use all the libraries you normally use for talking to stuff, some of which make it a lot easier, and it gives you a lot of flexibility. As you can see, you can use it with requests, which is used for doing all your web requests, and makes it very, very easy to set all of those up. You can use it with SQL Alchemy, which allows, or even just the DB2 API, sorry, DB-API connections, which allows you to go from the custom code that you write directly to a database. Pandas is for just doing, it's for doing data manipulation. So you can work with arrays, multiply your arrays up, that kind of thing. I haven't actually used it, but I know a lot of people like it, so there. And matplotlib if you want to programmatically generate graphs rather than going, I put some data into a spreadsheet and then I build the graph from the spreadsheet. You can build some quite complex charts. So, requirements. I have not got a Mac, so I cannot say anything really about Macs with this. I do know that there are some limitations. You can do user-defined functions with xlwings, and I believe you cannot use those with Excel for Mac, at least not at the moment. It's a bit of a shame, but you can get around it. When I've been doing everything, I've been doing it in Python 2.7 because I use Python 2.7 for other things. So I just got used to using it, and Python 3, it's a bit different. So I don't want to have to go to the trouble of learning all the little differences and making sure that my code is written for both and so on. But 3.3 and above work absolutely fine with this. Pywin32, unfortunately, you get that from SourceForge. I know that's bad, but it's the only place to get it. Com types, it's often installed anyway when you install Pywin32. And requests, as I said, it allows you to do all the web stuff. You can do it natively without having any additional libraries, but it's a bit more painful to write at that point because you've got to do a lot more setup work. There's Anaconda and WinPy, which are distributions of Python, which have a lot of things built into them. And that just means you can go, I install this, and I have everything else that I need. To install xlwings, you can use a Python package manager called pip, and it is just, well, when you've got it up and running with Python and the, I believe it's scripts directory in your path, you can just type pip install xlwings, and it will just install it for you. Having it with your path makes life so much easier for getting this stuff set up in the first place. So you don't have to always go see Python 27 / xlwings or whatever, you can just go xlwings. So once you've got it installed, there's instructions online for doing it, so I don't want to have to go over it because you just follow the instructions and it's done. You can just go xlwings, quick start, CREST workbook, or whatever you want to call the spreadsheet that you're working with. It's possible to retrofit this into an older spreadsheet, but there's a few more steps involved. This one will just give you a fresh one, which is all entirely set up. There's also, well, and when you don't have Excel running, there's an add-in to put in, which makes it easier to import all your UDFs and user-defined macros in Python. And you just install the add-in, and then when you need to, you just click the button, and it just imports what you need. It will create a the quick start will create a directory, which contains your spreadsheet. It is a macro-enabled spreadsheet, so passing it around between people will require them to accept the fact that there are macros in it and it could do bad things to their computer. It's not much of a problem, but it's something to be aware of. So it also in there you'll find, if you follow this one, CREST workbook.py, which is just a Python file which you put everything that you want to run into it. I'm not sure, but I don't believe anything will run if you just have it there. It all has to be called through methods. So, user-defined functions. This is one of the sample ones, so it's not particular. User-defined function, hit that button, and then you can just go equals double underscore sum, and then give it two numbers, and it will just return you a number. It will not automatically update unless you tell it to. There's, I think, a button to hit, or I think it's Control-Alt-F9. Don't quote me on that. Just to get it to run through the functions and update all the numbers. UDF downsides. Either you have a single number being returned, or you have to define the function as an array function. If I remember correctly, yeah, you select the place where you want the data to be put into, put in your function and hit Control-Shift-Enter, and it puts it in as an array function. It is a very defined set of numbers to return. So if you might get 20 results back, you have to select something that's 20 in size. You can't just go put one in and then it will just fill in all the other bits that you need. That's one of the downsides compared to doing this through Google Docs, where it will just automatically fill in all the data. There are benefits and drawbacks to that because it cannot overwrite any data that you've put into the sheet. It's just into the areas that you've explicitly told. Also, each user-defined function is called 1 by 1 by 1. So if you're going to hit CREST and get back 50 results, that's going to be 50 calls, and it's going to have to do setup work and breakdown work each time it's doing it. So it's not perfect for that. It will work, but if you want to pull 1,000 results, this is definitely not the way to do it. It will not be particularly efficient. There's things you can do in Python which work better, there's a library called requests futures, which allows you to set up requests to run in it's concurrently with each other, and then just dump out all the data at the end. User-defined functions are not particularly suited for use with this, whereas using the macros, which I'm going to mention later, make it a lot easier to deal with this. This is a sample function just for getting stuff from CREST for the highest buy price for something in a region. It's not the world's nicest looking function, and I'm being bad because I'm just putting in the exact URL. And because of changes which are coming with Citadel, this one won't actually, I don't believe this one will continue to work because the type parameter is changing format a little, because there will no longer be public CREST, there will just be CREST, and it will only ask for authentication if you actually need it, which you won't for this. But as you can see, it just gets the data, pulls it back in, and then it just runs through all of them and returns the highest price. Nice, simple function. Some people like this kind of thing. But if you wanted to extend this to return multiple values, you could just return an array at that point. But it would have to be defined as an array function within Excel. Otherwise, you would get a single result back, even if you are handing, here's 20 results, and in a way, you'll get the first one back unless it's defined to cover 20 cells. User-defined macros. You create these in pretty much the same way as a user-defined function. It's just a slightly different decorator. That's the @xwsub. It's there to tell it, load this up and make it available as a macro when it gets loaded. So you just define something. This is just a sample one again. It just returns a random number into a particular cell on a sheet. You can name the sheets, you can name the cells, you can work with named ranges if you want to. So this works. The import Python UDF, well, this isn't a UDF. It uses the same button because it's why have multiple when you don't need to. So you make your changes, you save it, you run that, and it will set it up again. If you want to make more changes, you can just make your changes. I'm not entirely sure if you need to re-import them, but it doesn't hurt to do. You don't end up with multiple definitions, so it just works. So if you're going to use use a macro, you just write your macro, and then when you hit Alt F8, it will just show up as a macro that you can call directly. You can also put that onto things like the quick start bar up at the top, or as just something on one of your ribbons. So you could have a macro that goes off and it gets a whole bunch of market data and then dumps it into a particular named sheet on something, which you can then reference later to go, I want the prices for this, this, and this. It's all there. And you can just pull as much data as you want and just write it straight into the sheet. I've got a sample on the next slide. As I said, it's very, very handy if you've got a bunch of stuff that you want to update. It's still probably not the best way of doing some really large stuff. You might want to do that outside, but I have opinions about spreadsheets. This is a very small sample macro. It will just get the, which one is this? Yeah, it will get the various indexes for all the systems in Eve and dump it into a specific sheet. I don't actually expect anyone to read this, but it's just going, here's an array, I build up my array of all the cells, all the rows, each column in every row, and then another array of all the rows. And then it just goes, dump it there, done. It's pretty simple, but it does require you to have a vague working knowledge of Python. I will be putting these up on GitHub when I get a chance, which will probably be tonight. Just so people can have something that they can kick around if they want to, and so on. Yeah, there's a bunch of stuff which is useful for here. You might want to do price data this way. You can reference other sheets from here. So if you know that I've got all the type IDs which I need on one sheet in a particular area, or it's a named range or something, I can target that, get all of those, just make sure it's deduped, and then I can just request after request after request. So, yeah, it will all be on GitHub. Yeah, the slide really wasn't that useful, except as an example. So, build an array, shove it in range. Yeah, I've been going through this a lot faster. I need to time myself better. What I would suggest is instead of doing a macro for some of this stuff, you might want to have a separate Python script which you run before you open the sheet up. And the first thing it does is it goes through it and goes, get all the price data that I need. I've got some sample scripts online for doing that. They can run reasonably quickly. I think I get about 7,000 prices in about 5 minutes. So that's all pretty much up-to-date data. Obviously, by the end of the 5 minutes, that might be up to 10 minutes out of date, but I suspect that's going to be enough for most people. So you can get all the price data and then just put it into a sheet or put it into a database and then reference that from a macro. xlwings does allow you to edit sheets which aren't open, I believe. If it doesn't, there's another plugin called OpenPyXML, which you can use, and you can just directly edit sheets with that. Doing things properly is hard. When I say properly, ideally you should never be referencing things like, well, you shouldn't be doing this is where the region prices are, so I just filled the region number in. Because if you do it that way, if CCP decide to change something, it breaks your sheet and you have to go and fix all the code. Ideally, what you should be doing is you should be hitting the base URL and getting out the all the endpoints and going, okay, so I go from base endpoint to the region endpoint, list off the regions, get the region which I actually want, and get the order data from there. And then I can go to where I've got all the type ID endpoints and pull out the actual URL for that and then just put it together. That's the proper way of doing things. But it's not particularly fun to work through. So a lot of people will end up writing code like I just wrote there, which works absolutely fine until something changes. It's a hell of a lot easier to write. Is that a good thing? I'm not so sure. It's probably not. Yeah. Spreadsheets are not particularly good for doing heavy logic in. You can end up with a spreadsheet when you open it and run a macro that it locks a spreadsheet out for quite a long time and it gives you no feedback on how far it's got through. Whereas if, for example, you were getting 7,000 bits of price data, you have a script which you just run separately and it can give you feedback on how it's going. So there's a nice Python module called, I think it's TQDM, which you just hand an array to, and it will go through the array one item by item by item by item, and it will just give you a bar along the bottom as it goes through each one. So you get a nice, this is how far I've got, this is how much longer it thinks it's going to take. Obviously, that's in Microsoft minutes, so yeah, it's based off how long it's taken so far to do the percentage it's done, so it works out. It should be this long, but that can change a great deal. Yeah, I like databases. I really like databases. They do the work that I need, and yeah, they're just not so good for displaying that data at the end. If you're going to do something long-term, I would recommend that you learn how to work with a database. So even if it's just something like SQLite, you get your data in through SQLite, right? You've got the Python script, you run it, it gets it all into SQLite, and then you just use the database to query that data and display it. That makes life a lot easier when you've got some heavy logic to do. I would hate to think how complicated some of the Python code would have to be to get a spreadsheet built up of all the build costs for something, so you can work out, this is my ISK per hour for everything that you can build with all the items that you have. Whereas doing it in a database, I can do that with one query, and then I could just build it and then just dump it all out. That would be nice and simple. Doing it in a spreadsheet would require me to do lots and lots of VLOOKUPs, which is a pain in the ass. I really don't recommend you do it in a spreadsheet that way. Doing it with the database makes life a lot easier. And as I said, I went through that far too quickly. So does anyone have any questions? Yes.
Other than the obvious advantage of sharing something on Google Docs, when do you think it's, for what use case in working with eData do you feel Google Docs is a better application to use versus using?
Google Docs, its code is all written in JavaScript and it handles JSON natively, so it makes that kind of thing very easy to work with. The biggest problems with it comparatively is down to processing power. So if you've got a fairly light sheet, which doesn't have to do a lot of calls, doesn't have to get a lot of data from elsewhere, and doesn't get updated particularly frequently, so a few times a day rather than every 10 minutes, then Google Docs works really well. Excel has a benefit that it's running on your machine, no one's going to limit what you're doing except for CCP when you pick CREST 5 million times a second. They kind of object if you try that. But it works, so yeah, Google Docs is easier to give to people as well. Because if you gave someone a sheet that you've done up with xlwings, they have to have xlwings installed, they have to have all the modules installed which you've got installed. But then it just works. So there's benefits and drawbacks of both. Personally, I would prefer to use Excel because then I can write in Python because I don't like JavaScript. But, yeah. Yes?
I'm just going to pile on to this question. have you considered using Excel for the compute locally, or database, and then pushing from Excel up to Google Docs for sharing? And is that something that can be easily set up with a daemon so you can just automate it?
Automatically, I think, would be quite difficult. Although what you could do instead of just using Excel for the compute, I'm pretty sure there's API for directly accessing Google Sheets. So you could just have a Python script that just runs in the background on a server somewhere, and it just goes, and I update the Google Sheet.
Oh yeah, take Excel out of it.
Take Excel completely out of the picture. Because by using xlwings, you're mostly taking Excel out of the picture anyway. It's not doing any of the heavy logic. That's all sitting off in a Python script. So there would be benefits to doing it that way if you've got a sheet which is too heavy for Google to deal with. I've never done it, so I can't talk about that too much, but it should be possible. I'm also fairly sure you can use, there's an import CSV function for Google Docs, which allows you just to load a CSV file in. So you could generate a CSV file on a server and just have Google load that in every time someone opens up the sheet. Obviously, you don't want to do that if it's a 5 meg file every time, because it will take a while to do. But it's possible. Anyone else? Okay. Well, in that case, it's been nice talking to you for not particularly long. Yeah. So about that. I always should go over these more. There's generally something I'm probably missing. But yeah, as I said, I will be putting stuff up on GitHub so you can see this stuff. I might put together a video for doing the installation. It's a fairly simple thing to go through. I've walked someone else through it, although that took longer because I forgot to tell them to install Pywin. Oh well. Well, thank you for coming.
Are you going to update your Google Spreadsheet libraries for the upcoming CREST as well? Like you have your utility sheet, I think that everybody uses in the ETH community.
Yeah. Trying to remember if I've actually got anything that hits CREST on that. If I do, I will update it. Most of the stuff I've written there is either hitting the XML API or it's hitting, what do you call it, ETH Central. But yeah, for the ones which are hitting CREST, I will update those to the new URL, so they should continue to work without any problem. Yeah. Oh, if anyone has any questions they want to ask about anything else, feel free to come and grab me.